Welcome to the Grief Files. I'm your host, Roxy Chalice. Here with me today is Clarissa Eastman. Clarissa lost her son tragically and suddenly. And today we're going to talk about her experience of grief and finding her path forward and the later on loss of her mom some years later and kind of the journey of navigating. Clarissa, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we start in, and I want to have you tell us the whole story, but before we kind of zoom out and have you tell us like the arc of the story, I'd like to just have you begin by tell us about your son. Tell us your son's name. Tell us a little bit about him.
So, Mason, sorry for my dogs.
No worries.
Mason Lawrence is his name. He was my second born, my largest baby. And it was like, my first was like super easy, and I just thought, oh, this parenting thing is cakewalk. And then I have my second, and it's just like this complete other thing. It's like having Cain and Abel in the house sometimes with the two of them. But no, you know, he he liked to be kind of challenging as a little kid. He's a little booger at times. He was such a big baby. He was born 9 pounds 10.5 ounces. So at 4 months he was already at 20 pounds. Like, he's just solid, just. And I loved it because all the little rolls and everything, and he was just so chunky. But it took no time. He was probably like 4 or 5, starting, school age and everything. And he just started slimming out, but he always, was like a big kid. And he ended up being my tallest kid. He was a little over 6 foot, but he looked like a little beanpole, and everybody be like, he was your biggest kid. Like, there's no way that little scrawny thing, made it out of you. But no, he was ornery in the beginning, but he had such a big heart, and he was very chill about stuff. Like, it was really hard to like push those buttons
Yeah.
to get him upset or riled up about anything. But if he really like, if he stood on something, he stood on it, and he would defend. And kids gravitated to him of all ages. Like, they always, like, it could be little babies, or it could be older kids, like everybody, like his aura or whatever you want to call it about him.
Yeah.
He didn't have to say a word, he didn't have to do anything. Like, everybody just gravitated to him. And such a big heart. So many stories of like him just, being that friend, or sticking up for the underdog, the kid that was getting bullied on, or that was different from everybody. He never saw that kind of stuff, with them. He just thought, you're just like me. He didn't treat him any different. He would help him out. He did scouting, and he loved to do service work. Any chance he could help hold a door open for somebody, or, he'd make me even stop the car and be like, I got to help this lady, and like get out of the car and go help them, whatever, or something. Very big into, being an American, and proud of his country. And he, in scouts, we do like flag ceremonies and things like that for that. And for Veterans Day, the school that his scout pack was in, they would do a ceremony every Veterans Day in the morning, and they would do the flag, and they would have, all the scouts, anybody that wanted to join. They would have a guy that did the bagpipes. They would have our local like fire and police and stuff like that show up, so we could honor them as well. And one time, the school district hadn't gotten to his school yet
Yeah.
for mowing. And so the grass was kind of tall, and he said, this does not look good enough for that, for us to do the flag ceremony. So he asked his dad if he could take the lawnmower down there and just mow it himself. So,
Yeah.
and it's just things like that, just taking that initiative to go and do the right thing, and be a good friend and stuff,
Yeah.
to people. But yeah, and then, when he got into the writing community, um, a lot of people know, that riders of any type of motorcycle, they kind of gravitate towards each other, and they always are there for each other. If they see somebody in need, they pull over. If they see another bike on the side of the road, they don't have to know them. They just know they're on a bike, so we got to pull over and
Yeah.
help them. And he made a lot of friends that way. He would see one in distress on the side of the road for whatever reason. Sometimes it's just that they had to make a phone call,
Yeah.
and they just had to pull over. But he'd strike up a conversation, and next thing you know, he'd have a new riding buddy.
That's sweet. And there's hand signals too, isn't there? I
Yeah.
dated somebody once and we would go out, I would ride on the back of his motorcycle. And I didn't know that every time another motorcycle passed, they'd give each other like a little
Yep.
hand signal. Yeah.
Yep. They do. They have, their own language and everything with that kind of stuff, and how they communicate, on their bikes. And it's really cool, to kind of see that, brother and sisterhood that come together with that. But
Yeah. So what
yeah.
kind of riding was it? This was street riding or this was off-road riding? What was he doing?
Yeah, so he first started out on a dirt bike. That was his first experience on motorcycles and stuff. And we, we made sure and taught him, the basics and stuff like that. And um, one of the other big things was, how to crash and how to crash properly, because that's sometimes a hard thing. But he did like the dirt bike stuff and everything for quite a while before he ever did a street bike.
Yeah.
He was probably about, so he started dirt biking at like 14. He was probably about 16, 17 when he got to do street bikes.
Okay.
And he was more into, the sport style of
Yeah.
bikes versus like the Harleys and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, he did really good though. I mean, he would, like the local police department, would put on a course each
Mhm.
year or every so many months, and he would, take the courses and get certifications and just anything like that, just to make
Yeah.
sure that he was a good rider. And
Yeah.
but yeah, he loved, and as boys do, he loved to go fast and learn tricks and stuff like that. But he was really good about it, and he was really safe, and he knew the time and the place, to do that kind of stuff, so that way there was no major risk. As
Yeah.
with anything, there's a risk, but
Yeah.
nothing major. So,
Yeah.
but
Wow. So let's fast forward for a minute and then I'll have you tell us the story, the whole
okay.
story of what happened. I just feel like sometimes when it comes to things like grief or loss or tragedy, sometimes we stay up at that high level. We tell the story arc of the thing that happened. But the purpose in this show is for us to really kind of explore what it feels like to be the one who's in grief. In that kind of intimate and granular way, both for others who are sharing the experience of grief and for people who are loving and endeavoring to support someone who's going through it. We want to really look at what grief looks like. And so, what I want to ask you to do is tell me a couple of things. One would be grab a snapshot, any snapshot of your experience being in grief, and try to close your eyes if you want to and put yourself back in that position and give us the scene, but again, like a zoomed in, like we're taking a Polaroid, a snapshot, something, but we're just looking at the details of the scene. Like, where are you? What are you feeling? What was grief like? And you can pick any moment.
Feeling like he was ripped from my womb. That emptiness, not only in my heart, but in my womb.
Yeah. Even though
Feeling,
it's grown.
yeah, because I've always felt very connected with all of my children, like no matter how grown they are. And yeah, receiving that news, it was just not only heartbreaking, but I felt this pain in my womb area, just like it was just violently ripped out and away from me, and I did not have that connection anymore. Like I had lost that.
Yeah.
Um
And it
And
was
that was,
physical, like, you could feel that as a physical sensation in your body as well as an emotional sensation in your body. Wow.
yeah.
Is
And
that
that took a while to
yeah,
kind of dissipate. I mean, there's times when it spikes, but I mean,
yeah, yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. The other thing I wanna ask you about, is what was the most surprising thing about grief for you?
that I can still have happy moments.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that losing your child has changed you as a mother in terms of your ongoing relationship with your living children?
Most definitely.
Yeah,
Um, I tried, and I still do, but I especially tried not to immediately feel like I needed to put my kids in bubble wrap and just be like, nobody's leaving the house, nobody's doing anything. I can't lose another one of you guys, like just
yeah.
that initial
Mhm.
fear of them doing anything. I quickly had um, a slap of reality, that I definitely can't stop anything. Things are going to happen no matter what. Um, I'm a religious person, and so I have to put that on him, and just let him have that control.
Yeah,
Um, I can't do that work, like that's not for me to do.
yeah.
Um, but I lost my son on July 8th of 2023, and on August 1st, just not even a full month later, I get a phone call that my youngest is unresponsive in a ditch, and he
Okay.
had an accident. He was skateboarding down a steep hill and lost control and Supermaned into a boulder in this really deep ditch, and had fractured his skull, and a whole bunch of other body parts were messed up and stuff. And he ended up going in and out of consciousness and everything. They had to do brain surgery, had a brain bleed. It was really kind of scary during all that. So,
Wow.
um, you
And
know,
this is like within a month of your son's passing, of Mason passing.
yes.
Wow.
So, I honestly it just is very overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, to say the least,
Mhm.
to not only lose one, but then almost lose another one, like in such a short amount of time.
Mm.
And grief kind of had to take a back seat for a minute, but it at the same time was like, no, we don't want to take a back seat. We want to be loud and proud
Yeah.
at the same time. So it was really difficult, but I had to realize, like, I can't wrap my kids up in bubble wrap, and I can't hover over him. I still have my youngest. You would never even know unless his hair's cut short, or like he specifically shows you his scar. Like you
You
wouldn't know. Like the doctor said, it was amazing how he came out of it so well. I mean, 3 weeks later, and he's in school like nothing ever happened.
wow.
They said we usually don't see kids with this kind of head trauma do this well. And
Hmm.
I praise God for that, and prayers were definitely answered. But
Yeah.
um, I had to realize, like
Yeah.
things are gonna happen, and I have to navigate better, with that.
Yeah. All you can do
So
is respond really with a lot of that. It's out of your control.
yeah,
Would you say that you are I was very curious to ask this, and I didn't even know the story about your youngest son. Would you say ultimately, after you lost Mason and then you went through this ordeal with your youngest son, do you think that that left you more afraid or less afraid as a mother at that point in time than you had been prior to those experiences?
I was more afraid,
Yeah.
definitely more afraid.
Yeah.
And it's still like, you know, my youngest, during during this time, he was 15 when he had the accident. and since then has become a new driver and stuff, and he's kind of like his older brother, and he's fearless, and he's got that same kind of goofy, funny,
Yeah.
attitude about things and stuff. And he's, as boys are, he's like, oh, let's see what we can do. Like, he did not want to give up the skateboard, and
Mhm.
he got his license, and
Wow.
wanted to see how fast he could go and things. And I'm just like over there just going, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
but
But
yeah.
you support him. You support him in living his biggest life and knowing the risks are there. And
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I had to help explain that to the doctors. They weren't too thrilled
Mm,
that, I only could get 2 months out of him. They wanted a whole year of him not touching a
mm.
skateboard. And I was like, yeah, you try to tell like Tony Hawk or Travis Pastrana, that, oh, you can't do this stuff. And that's their life. That's their livelihood, and to my youngest, the skateboard was his therapy. And that's how he, would handle things and deal with stuff and everything. And
And he just lost
Mason,
a brother. Yeah.
yeah. And I was just like, I'm not going to take that stuff away from him. And Mason, the same thing. He felt like riding the motorcycle was like therapy for him. If he was having a bad day, he could get on that motorcycle and all that just melted. And so I couldn't deny them that kind of stuff if that's what was bringing joy to their lives. So
Yeah.
I'm like, can you just compromise with me and be safe? Just bring a
No,
helmet with you.
mad respect to you for the courage. I think what you're describing is the definition of courage. It's not that there's not fear. It's that there's fear and you're not letting it rule the day. You know, I remember I lost my daughter was stillborn in 2016. And then the year following my son was born. And I did like co-sleeping. There was a lot of, like you said, I was terrified all the time, especially because, my daughter was perfectly fine. And when I had sensed something was the matter and the doctors had said, no, 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 you're just anxious. Like, we've checked her out. She is absolutely fine. But it wasn't her. It was something in my body had gone haywire. And I had rightly sensed something was wrong, but I could not elicit a response fast enough to save her. They tried a life-saving intervention and it was just too late. And so I carried that obviously into bringing my infant son into the world. And I had him sleeping on my chest. And eventually I moved him to the crib. And I still remember the moment when I had to make a decision because I woke up and thought I'd heard something on the baby monitor, but there was nothing. And I'm laying there in my bed and his is in the next room. And I have this sense, right? Just like, my son's not breathing. My son's not breathing. And every part of me wanted to like jump up and go to the next room. But I had this realization that I was like, this is the fear track. There's no reason to think this is happening. If you get up and go in there now, the next thing is going to be that you better just sleep on the floor next to the crib. And then the next thing is going to be, actually, what if you didn't wake up? You should probably get in the crib so you can feel if he like stops breathing. And the next thing is going to be that you're waking him up at intervals to make sure. And pretty soon you're working so hard to preserve his life. He doesn't get to have one and neither do you. Like, you have to stop it. And I remember telling myself, you're going to lay in this bed until you're not afraid. And then you can get up and go check on him. But we're not running in there because we're just struck with a thought of terror. And I did that. And that's kind of when I began the work and it's an ongoing, he's 8 now. It's an ongoing process of, I will still call my sister sometimes and be like, I have a horrible sense he's going to die. I think he's going to die today. I have a horrible sense. And she'll be like, okay, let's talk about this. Let's hold it,
That's scary. That
Yeah.
is so scary. Yeah. I mean, and I have I have those fears. So I completely understand, what that feels like. I mean, yeah,
And
it's
once it's happened, right? Like how it happened for you and how it happened for me, uh, it gets harder to quiet that menacing voice in our head that says the worst thing is going to happen right now. And I don't even know that there's a way to logic through that necessarily, right? It's just that, except I think what you just said is like, we want them to live their best lives. We want to live our best lives. And yeah, horrible things could happen. And we know they have happened. And yet, you know, we are here today, you and I both, our lives are continuing on. We're loving our living children. We're loving our non-living children. And somehow, like you said, you continue to have joy in life, even after.
I don't want death to steal that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Clarissa, do you want to tell us the story of the event as it happened for you?
Yeah, I can do that. So the last time I got to see my son was a week prior to his accident. You never know when it's going to be your last time to see somebody or to talk to them. And,
Yeah.
um, I got to, see him and we had our little, normal conversations, joking around and stuff like that. Hugs and kisses by, the I love yous and everything, which I will always cherish.
Yeah.
The day of the accident, my son was 21, so he did not live with me, had his own life. So I didn't always have, all the whereabouts and happenings of him and everything like I did my younger kids. But my youngest was actually coming home from church camp. And so I had texted Mason and was like, hey, your brother's, going to be coming home from camp and everything. You'll have to definitely check in with them and see how it all went and stuff. And he's like, yeah, I will. And then that was it. That's the last time I talked to him that day.
Yeah.
I knew that like on the weekends, because he worked um, as a journeyman or an apprentice, should I say, an apprentice electrician.
Mm.
And so, he had his weekends off, and weekends was like bike time, like he's got to go and hang with his friends. And I figured, they're all going to be somewhere riding, right, that night. So I probably wouldn't hear or see from him again until the next day. And he had been over at a friend's house and had left there and was on his way to the casino. Some of his buddies, I guess one of them had a birthday, and
Okay.
everybody was going to the casino to go celebrate.
Yeah.
And so he was actually going to be on his way going. Um, a kid who was coming out of the Brahms on the other side of the intersection that my son was going through,
Mhm.
he didn't make sure that it was clear.
Mm.
And my son was going through the intersection, and by the time he got to the other side, was the entry exit to the Brahms. And that kid, um, he just thought, he did not see my son and thought he could just, clear the traffic and hit my son head on. Um, I'll spare a lot of the majorly bad details, but my son was thrown from the bike, and he died on the scene.
Mm.
Um, and he had his helmet and all that stuff on. He was not speeding. He wasn't doing anything, even though everybody tried to say that, oh, he was doing wheelies. He was speeding. But the cameras, that they were able to get proved otherwise.
Wow.
The bike proved otherwise. Nothing happened to the kid. The news, blasted my son's mangled motorcycle all over the news. They
Oof.
didn't really, put any emphasis on the SUV that killed him, and how it looked. They just, every time he turned on the TV, it was just my son's motorcycle. Um, But I was home, just my boyfriend and I. The kids were all out doing, their thing, and
Yeah.
um, it was really late. It was probably almost 11 o'clock, and I was actually getting ready to go to bed. And my boyfriend was outside working in the garage, and an officer shows up, and he, you know, he was like, "What the heck? Why do we got a police officer here?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Is Clarissa here?" And Doug's like, "Yeah, what's this all about?" And he goes, I need to talk to Clarissa." And he's like, "Well, I'll get her, but what's this pertaining to? Is everything okay?" And he's like, I need to talk to Clarissa." So he, gets me to come outside, and so I stand on the porch, and the officer is like, "Is Mason Lawrence your son?" And I said, "Yeah." "What happened? What did he do?" I'm Mason's had so many speeding tickets, like, and he proudly had them displayed in his bedroom. He paid every one of them off, and it was his little trophies, like. So
Yeah.
I just thought, oh, this time, because he's one 4th of July. Sorry to tangent over, but one 4th of July, none of his regular street bikes worked. They were all needing repairs. He wanted to go to the Quick Trip. He got on the dirt bike
Oh no.
and rode to the Quick Trip. Well, in the process, he was popping some wheelies and showing off on the way, and happened to be right in front of a police officer.
Oh
So
no.
that time, like, he got the bike impounded,
Oh,
and we got the phone call, like, "Hey, come pick me up. My bike got impounded. I need to ride home, and I got to help get the bike out." So I'm thinking, that now it's, he's in jail.
right.
We've got his bike or whatever. I'm just thinking, what mischief did he get into this time and everything. And the officer was like, "I'm sorry to inform you, but your son has been in an accident, and he did not make it."
Mm.
And I was like, "No." I was like, that's not right." And he's like, "No, I'm sorry, but he died on scene." And I was like, "No, that's impossible. You guys, like, where's the cameras? Like, this is a prank." And even my boyfriend was like, "No, that's not possible."
Mm.
And the officer was like, "I really wish that I had different news for you, but unfortunately, it's true. He was killed in an accident. Another vehicle had pulled out and hit him, and he didn't make it." And I could not wrap my head around that my son could really be gone. And it was so hard, and I kept going, "No, no, no, this is no." And I ended up, my knees just buckled, and I just hit the ground. um the officer and my boyfriend, they grabbed me, and they got me into a chair. They, got me water and Kleenex and everything, and I just sat there, and I just, like, "No, no, this just can't be." And then my heart just started breaking, and I had that feeling in my womb, like he was just violently ripped from me, and I just did not have him anymore.
Yeah.
And I started screaming. I was so upset. And the officer was really awesome. I mean, he stayed. He said, "We've reached out, to some of your other family. They're supposed to be on their way." And my mom and my other kids, they all came. I had to well, so my youngest, when he got out of church camp, he decided he wanted to go stay the night at his grandma's that night, and hang out with his oldest brother,
Mm.
and play games and stuff, and visit with her. So he was already there. And I guess when they were trying to locate me, they went to the address on his driver's license, which was his best friend's house where he was living. He was rooming with his best friend. And his best friend didn't have my contact information, just knew my name. But it was like, this person would know. And so got in contact with this other person who got them to go to my mom's and call my mom. And my mom, like she knew before me, but which I can't even imagine getting that call and being told over the phone, that your grandson's been killed. But anyways, they were like, where's, his mother live? We need to try to contact her. We need to drive to her house. Do you guys know her address? And my mom was just in hysterics. She couldn't. So luckily my youngest was there, and he's like, yeah, this is our address. And so they were able to send, and they told my mom and them, just like, give us like so much time before you start heading that way so we can be able to get the news to her. And the officer stayed until they got there, and I ended up having to call my daughter and tell her she needed to come home. And so everybody showed up, and the officer stayed until, I assured him, that it was safe for him to leave. And then, we sat there on the porch and just in utter disbelief.
Yeah.
It was so hard. I mean, I just felt like I couldn't process anything. Nothing made sense in the world anymore. And everything was dark.
Yeah.
And then I just felt bad for my kids because I've always been their rock.
Yeah.
And I felt at that time like I don't even know how I'm going to be able to hold them up in this.
Yeah.
Like I've always been able to help them through everything in their life, but
Yeah.
how am I going to be able to do that when I've just lost their brother, like it was the worst night of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. And since that time, which really was not that long ago, and you've been navigating what it means to be alive after something like that.
Yeah, I was put on suicide watch for a little while. Because I had already told my family, Mason had lost a really, really close friend to a similar accident the January prior to him.
Oh, wow.
And I helped, Mason attend that funeral as support, because he was very, very upset to lose Alex. And Alex was a great kid. He was like Mason, where he just had that brightness about him that just everybody gravitated to and everybody wanted to be friends with.
Yeah.
And they were so funny together, always cracking jokes and stuff. And it was really upsetting. And I attended that funeral with him, and I just was like, I can't go through this. I can't do this. I can't be like those parents that are up there talking about their son at the funeral, and I can't go through this. And I had a conversation with God. I was like, don't put me through that. I was like, I'm strong, but I'm not that strong. I can't.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to be able to live life
Yes.
if I lose any one of my kids. And then 6 months later, 2 weeks exactly before his 22nd birthday, I lost Mason.
Wow.
And Yeah, I had never really, I mean, I've lost family members and stuff like that, but it's like the ones that are like really old and you just like, you're like, they've had their life, it's their turn, it's okay, like
Yeah.
we're gonna miss grandma, but she's in her 90s. It's just that's the path, like you're more accepting of it. It's a loss, but to lose a child is not the natural path of things.
Yeah.
And it was like no other thing that I'd ever experienced
Yeah.
when it came to grief. And then to try to navigate the next steps, and I'm supposed to have a clear level head of like going, okay, you know picking a funeral home, or deciding if he's going to be cremated or buried, or what songs should be played at his funeral, like
Mm.
um how can I get this whole beautiful life that he's had put into this little obituary,
Yeah.
just to make all those kind of decisions. What's going to be the outfit that he wears, in the casket? And
Yeah.
it was just like so hard to be able to do that in such a short time frame. And I was just everywhere, and I just felt
Yeah.
like no matter how many people were in the room with me trying to grieve with me and help me, I just still felt so alone.
Yeah. Because
Like
you
I
are,
didn't have.
we
Yeah.
are alone in grief. I think it's the biggest um, untruth about grief that we say you're not alone in this. You are. Now we're right here on the outside, but in that inner sanctum of grief, that's yours alone. There's nobody else who can be in there with you. And I think it's important to admit that truth because you feel it. And when people are telling you you're not alone, but you feel the most alone you've ever felt, then you feel some kind of disconnection, some kind of mistrust with yourself. I think that was one of the most shocking things to me as well. My husband at the time, we both had lost our daughter, and we were banished to like separate grief islands. I mean, we were not in the same place in that experience. We were in separate hellscapes, and it was really tough to even find each other. I'm curious on this topic, because obviously there's a lot of stages and phases of grief, and there's your immediate shock of the trauma of this, and then there's all of those decisions you had to be made, and then at some point beginning to make some kind of a transition back to normal activities. And I'm curious through those different iterations, if anything stands out that anyone said or did or didn't say or didn't do in a mode of support that stood out, that like reached you, that felt like bracing and loving and supportive. If there was any ways that resonated.
I think I don't think anybody necessarily said anything profound, at least not that I can think of right now, but I had I have a not had, but I have a friend who lost a child. And I was there through not the beginning that started it all, but I was there towards the end of his life, and when he finally passed. And then also, being able to connect with Alex's parents after I lost Mason and stuff, and seeing the example that life does go on, and that you can keep taking those little steps forward each day, and waking up and just putting one foot in front of the other. Just seeing that, like you still can continue. Um, you can still give to your other kids. You can still give to your job and your spouse and to everybody. Like you could still move forward. Like I just looked at it as like, if they can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah, I'm not alone, and yet I feel alone, but then I see that I'm not alone, that there's other people that have continued on after losing a child. And
Yeah.
so I can too.
Yeah. What about in the negative? And this is from a from a place of hopefully educating those who are listening, because I think for most of us who've experienced loss, I think especially if it's a loss of a child, I think just around death generally, people don't know what to say. And I'm curious if your experience showed you either things to not say or not do, or things that to say or to do. Um,
Definitely not anything. I mean, I already, have kids, and my kids are pretty well up there in age when all this was going on. So, it was clear that I wasn't going to be like looking to pop out any new kids, but, it was like, well, at least you have your other kids.
wow. Mm-mm.
Or I've even heard some go, well, you can always have another kid, and it's just like, it's not my dog dying. And when I can just go, oh, well, I'll just, go get another dog from the pound, it's not like that,
Yeah.
and to some people, even that would be, if you told them, well, you could just go get another dog, after their dog dies. I mean, that's their family member,
Right.
like that's like a kid to them. You can't just discard that, like there's a connection there. And it's just, at least I have my other kids. Like, did you think about that before you spoke it? How did it sound to you in your head, really, when you said that, is my question. Like, yeah, thank goodness I still have my other kids, that I'm not having to deal with multiple. I mean, I can't even imagine. You hear about those car crashes and stuff where, like a whole family is killed or whatever, or they lose multiple of their kids in a horrific accident and everything. And I couldn't even imagine dealing with that. I was really close with Calvin, having his skateboarding accident, having to,
Yes.
go through something worse, but I mean, to just sit there and just make it out like, oh, well, you can just, like, definitely, I would say, don't ever say that to somebody when they've lost anything, period.
Yeah.
Um,
Because we can always say what we do have, but it's I think people are trying to throw some kind of hope out there, but what ends up happening is it feels invalidating. It feels really invalidating, right? Somebody's business that they sweat and bled for goes belly up, and people go, well, at least you have your health. It's like,
yeah,
well, okay, but so incidentally do you. Some
yeah,
people have their health and some people do not, but like that does not have anything to do, that doesn't pertain to the fact that I'm having an agonizing human experience, that I'm suffering a crushing sense of loss, um, which is a horrible thing to go through. And I don't think there's any lessening that blow. Do you?
no, I feel like what's helped me the most is either just, not saying anything at all, and just saying, I'm sorry for your loss, just the kind of generic thing, and just leave it at that.
Mm.
But maybe offering, you know could I give you a hug?
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't need to have words. We just need to feel,
Yeah.
and have a safe space to feel that, whether it be a physical feeling or just an emotional feeling, like that I can either just be listened to, that I have a safe space to talk about,
Mhm.
and not feel like I'm a burden because, I'm bringing my son up again for the umpteenth million time, that I miss him and I love him and I'm upset that he's gone,
Yeah.
or that, I'm retelling a story for the umpteenth million time about how he rode his motorcycle on the 4th of July and was doing wheelies and, got his bike impounded, like, let me, let me. Don't discourage that, like, I need that kind of release, or to sit there and physically, give me comfort, whether it be, a shoulder rub or a pat on the back, or, hold my hand, or, just give me a really good hug, like, people don't always have to say stuff
Mm.
to help us feel better. Sometimes it's just listening or just physically being there.
Yeah. I love that. I don't think anyone shared it quite like that before that I've spoken with, and I think words really do fail us, and because of that, I see a lot of people avoid someone in the aftermath of loss. Um, that was one of the most that was a shocking part of it for me about grief is how everybody just kind of ghosted, right? Because they were like, "Oh, I don't know what to say," right? And I
Yeah,
think
once all the funeral potatoes are gone and,
mhm, mhm.
everything settles down, it's like,
It's a known phenomenon. I mean, one of the things to do, in my opinion, if you want to show up for somebody who's going through a grief journey, first of all, just show up. Just like you just said, you don't have to say anything. You're there and you're just in the vicinity and you give them a squeeze, you show up, you just stand with them, sit with them. Sitting vigil is a long-standing human tradition, and it's very, very meaningful to just be there. Just not come around. You don't have to say anything, just come around. And then the other thing I would say is mark your calendar. Mark your calendar for a week after that funeral. And that's when
yes.
that person there's a dip that happens there. There's been all of this activity and all of these people and all of the potluck dishes and all the just a million things, and then suddenly it stops, and it's part of the natural progression that you resume regular life, but it's too dramatic for most people. Like, you're trying to figure out how to be alone with yourself again in this new landscape. One of the most meaningful ways, and I think again, I remember there were some people who seemed to just have a really good sense for this. They would just like show up with like a movie or like a six pack or whatever the case. It didn't really matter. And whatever they showed up with, we probably didn't do anyway, but maybe we did.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that particularly in the first 6 months, I think people would come over and I think I would kind of not be aware of myself and just kind of stare into space or whatever. Like, I think I just wasn't actually very engaged or responsive at all. But I was very aware they were there, and I was very grateful they were there. It was really scary to be alone at first for any length of time. I could do like an hour, a few hours. If I was going to be alone for a day, it was not going to be good for me.
Yeah.
You know, you have to
Yeah,
ease that.
most definitely. And, you know, of course, we went through all this stuff to have the funeral,
Yeah.
standing room only,
Yeah. Yeah.
motorcycle procession, that just was awesome. The
Wow.
whole building shook when they pulled in and they were all revving their engines, and it was so awesome,
Yeah.
the whole place just vibrated, and it was, I mean,
No.
people, like, I inherited a new family of people that he was friends with, that some of them I didn't know yet.
Yeah.
Um, but I inherited a whole group of young kids, like, and
Yes.
some of them weren't even like young. Some of them were even like my age that he was friends with, that
Yeah.
they rode bikes with and stuff. But and we decided to do a big huge birthday celebration, for his 22nd birthday, so which would have been his golden birthday. Um so we did a little gathering here at the house, and we live on some acreage, and we was able to do a fireworks show, and then we did lanterns and sent them off into the air, and everybody came on their motorcycles and stuff, and just
Yes.
kind of had a little simple shindig for them, and it was really beautiful. And then you know after that, everything just kind of died down for a second, and I was like trying to catch my breath. It was hard.
Yeah.
Um, and then the whole Calvin thing happened, and then everybody, all came and, was helping out with that and stuff. And then it kind of died down again. But, you know, the guys that, he was riding buddies with and stuff, they were going through a lot too, having lost, you know, not only Mason, but prior to that, they lost Alex and stuff. And they were really good though about following up and just messaging me out of the blue and just going, "Hey, I was thinking about you.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Is there anything I can help you out with? Mason was really awesome. I want to share you a photo, that I have of him from when we was hanging out, or I want to tell you a story, about, one time when we was riding or we was out doing this or whatever, and it was just so nice because like over the course of like that first year, they would drop these or tag me or tag him or whatever, on Facebook and stuff. And it was just like these little Easter eggs, getting to have all that stuff. And sometimes that's also very helpful, if you were close to that loved one that was lost and you have anything that they don't already have of them, or didn't know of, like share those stories and those photos and videos and stuff like that, because you know
Mm.
we're hoarders of those things.
Of course, because you don't get to have more. You don't get
Yeah.
to, yeah. No, I love that. One final thing I want to touch on, and I know this might be tough. This might be a tough subject, but I'm curious for you. You mentioned about the young man who was driving the SUV that struck your son. And I guess just my own, like my maternal instincts wants to like, have you wanted to like meet with him? Have you met with him? Do you know the identity of this individual? Have you had any contact of any kind?
No, I'm not against meeting him, but I figure that's probably not something that they would want, to do.
Mm.
Most people don't really want to. He was 17. There was another 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 13-year-old in the
Oh,
vehicle when it happened.
oh wow.
And, you know, their names are all listed on the police report. I mean, I could easily, I got the insurance information. I filed the claim. Nothing happened at the scene of the crime. It's easy to try to just immediately be angry at this kid. And I'm not going to lie that I've not had angry moments,
Yeah.
but I made a deal with myself in the very beginning that I wasn't going to let anger consume me.
Yeah.
Um, I'm more angry at how the police handled the investigation. They didn't cite the boy. Had my son been in a car, the kid would have gotten a ticket. But
Mhm.
because my son was on a motorcycle, the prejudice that's there, the kid walked away with nothing, absolutely nothing. So I had to end up, taking his insurance company, you know, to court to get
Oh,
settled. So, it was upsetting in that sense, and the officer said that he was going to do all these things, and it's been 2 years and nothing's been done.
mm,
The insurance company did say that the family gives their condolences, but I don't know if that's just what they tell everybody, just to keep
yeah.
things kosher, or if like that family truly did speak to the insurance company and said, if surely she's gonna file a claim, and so, can you pass this message on? Um, but I mean, if I was to run into him, and everything, I would feel bad for him.
Mm,
Like I definitely experienced more of a loss than they did,
yeah.
but the there were details that were shared with me of the eyewitness statements, of the very details of how things went and happened, and
Yes.
what those kids would have seen happen to my son in that collision. um I know will stick with them for the rest of their lives. It was very traumatic.
Mm,
um the depiction that they described of what happened.
yes.
And so, those kids would have seen that and they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. And
Ugh,
I can't imagine, what that must be like. I've not had to experience something like that, and I feel bad for them,
yeah.
that that did happen, that they had to experience it on that end.
Yeah.
And so I just hope that they are receiving the help that they need to be able to get through that
Mm,
and be able to go on with life. I don't wish any ill will towards them or anything like that, but they might be scared that I would, and I don't think that they would probably want to meet me. So I've never tried to reach out because I don't want to add to their wound.
yeah. Yeah. Would you Would you want an apology from the family if it was offered?
I mean, I would accept it if they did, but I'm not like ever going to hold anything against them if they didn't ever,
Yeah,
or because I'm sure that I would like to think that they truly do feel bad,
of course.
and that they truly do, offer their condolences and everything, and their apology, and they probably feel like maybe I don't want anything to do with them because maybe I'm just like super angry and holding on to that, it's all your fault, and I don't feel that way.
Right.
Um,
I mean, obviously it was an accident, right? It was an accident. And
yeah. Um, so I'm sure that they're scared, and that they would feel the same, but
mm,
it's just, I guess I'm just scared to take the chance to find out how they truly feel,
yeah,
because if it wouldn't be in a positive light, if they were like
yeah.
um deflective of this, and just defensive, and
Mhm.
well, your son, or whatever, I don't
Yeah,
want to add that to my wound, so I'd rather just not
yeah,
than do so.
yeah. That makes sense. Thank you for speaking to that. I think that I think forgiveness is a big piece of the grief journey for all of us, actually. I mean, in my own experience, you know, I said something's wrong with my daughter, something's wrong with my daughter, something's wrong with my daughter, you know. I said it
Yeah.
to my husband, I said it to the doctors, and everyone said, no, 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 right? But then again, she died on my watch. She died in my body while I was right there. And so there's a lot of forgiveness. And I still remember the moment when the therapist I was working with at the time said, we need to talk about your anger at Simone. And I was like, how dare you? How would I be angry at her? Like, and she's like, because anger just says it's not okay. And we are angry at people who leave us. We are angry at everyone who's involved, ourselves included. And for me, I feel like I have to forgive intentionally every time I remember, every time I call it to mind, like every time I tell the story of my daughter, I need to re-forgive myself and her and my husband and the doctors and every imaginable person who touched it for exactly the reason you said, because otherwise, like that sense of anger, that sense of victimization, it will overtake you. And at the end of the day, this is life, right? This is life. And we poison ourselves when we hold on to these things. But I think the aspect of anger and forgiveness is very real, for anyone who experiences a core loss, especially a traumatic one like what you went through. You know,
I allow myself to experience it because it's a necessary part of the grief, but I do not allow myself to sit in it.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I have forgiven and I've prayed for them, that they're able to, overcome.
yeah,
And just like everything with Calvin, and his recovery, I just put it in God's hands
yeah,
and just go, you do your work.
yeah,
I know that my son would want me to also, because he was just that kind of person.
yeah, yeah. No, that's really true. Well, Clarissa, thank you so much for being here and for everything that you've shared. Is there anything else that you would want to convey on this topic before we sign off today?
I would say, having lost a child, that was of the age that he was, making those kind of decisions, talk with your family, like have those hard communications, conversations with them at age appropriate levels
Yeah,
about, not just what you want as a parent for when your time is to come, but also like what they would want,
yeah,
you know, um, because if we're not promised tomorrow with our child and we lose them, we want to honor their wishes,
yeah,
and we so often, think about, well, I'm going to be the one to go first, so I'm only going to talk about mine, but we kind of do need to know about theirs, and make sure that everybody's, on the same page with that kind of stuff. It's not fun, but um it'll make things easier down the road if you have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if you're 70 and they're 50,
Yeah.
have that conversation
Yeah.
and just be there for each other. Talk about it.
Yeah.
Talk about how you feel after you've lost that loved one, no matter who they are. Don't be afraid to talk about them. They're still there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Clarissa. Thank you for sharing Mason's story with us. This has been wonderful to hear from you.
I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely.